Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Parashat class. Perashat Behar. What is the greatest gesture of giving you can make to a fellow Jew? You might know the answer to that question, but how do you find the answer to that question? Perashat Behar is known for the highlighted mitzvot of Shemitah and Yovel, but hidden deeper in the parasha are some pesukim and one specific phraseology that is one of the underpinnings and foundation of the idea of tzedakah and giving. And the truth is, when you talk about tzedakah, the parashiot and pesukim in the Torah, there's basically three sources. There's one, the first, which is famous in Parashat Mishpatim, Im Kesef Talveh et Ami. From that pasuk, or few pesukim, you get some important ideas and laws regarding tzedakah. You have our parasha in Behar, which we'll get to in more detail in a moment, but speaks of the fact that when yamuch achicha, when your fellow man becomes impoverished and he's on hard times, then you have certain expectations as to how to uplift him, and the pasuk will focus on umata yado emach, begins to slip, hazakta bo, uphold him. This does not have with it too many halachot attached. And then you have the third, and you can call the main source, which is in Perashat Re'eh. In Perashat Re'eh, speaking about, of course, the holidays, but it also speaks first about Maaser, and speaks again about Shemitah, and there segues into a long discussion about should your fellow man be an Evyon, be an impoverished person, an unfortunate situation, and it gives us a number of famous phrases and commands. Open your hand for him. Don't hold back. There are a number of seemingly repetitious phrases. And from that parasha, from that paragraph, in that source, in the air, there are many laws regarding the laws of tzedakah that are sourced. Let's go back to our parasha. Our parasha, the Torah, Kadosh Baruch Hu, brilliantly finds a way to segue from the main topic, which is Shemitah, the sabbatical year / Yovel, the Jubilee year. And that is speaking about commerce and acquisitions during the time between years 1 and 50. Sales and purchases of lands and homes, the fact that their sale price is relative to the amount of years left in Yovel, in the Jubilee cycle, and depending on whether it's a home in a walled city or not a walled city, etc. And speaking about that, all of a sudden the Torah addresses a eventuality and a reality, and that is that sometimes people have to sell even though they don't want to sell. And if you're following the parashas, Parashat Behar, Perek Kafeh, Pasuk Kafeh, 25, addresses Kiyamuch Achicha. Now that word we'll see repeated several times. Kiyamuch. What does the word Yamuch mean? The Aramaic translation says Are Yitmaskan. Miskin is a word that we use for someone who's unfortunate in an unfortunate situation. Are Yitmaskan means a certain person becomes not necessarily impoverished, like some English translations may say, but it means he's in an unfortunate situation. It's a general term. And he's forced to sell from his inherited land. And there are laws then. He must sell. He can redeem. In fact, one of his relatives should redeem the land from the buyer to try to retrieve it back. But of course, if not, it'll eventually come back to him in the 50th year in the Yovel year. If you think about that situation, it's quite sad. People that are forced, let's talk about modern day, to sell the homes that they love, the property, the land that they love, and they worked hard for. It could be a family property, could be something that was passed down over generations, or even if it's not, it's his place of dwelling. The fact that hard times financially have caused him to have to sell, to part with it, that really is a situation that we really feel empathetic and sad for that person. And unfortunately, it's commonplace. We see it happen around us. However, it's not the most desperate situation in the world. The person needs cash. He needs to pay off debt. He sells his asset. And he's on his feet. So ki amuch yitmaskan, unfortunate difficulties, but he got out of it. In the context in the Torah's laws of Yovel, he got out of it following the protocol of the Torah, and he's back on his feet. A short 10 Pisukim later, in Pasuk Lamed He, you see the phrase repeated. Ki amuch achicha. Again, when you see a fellow man that has chanced upon an unfortunate situation in life, and here it says, instead, not that he has an opportunity just to sell, cash out, get back on his feet. No. Umata yado imach. And he begins to slip and to fall. The word mata, harerabim lahatot, means really to lean. It means to start descending, going downward. It could mean to falter, to slip. And he begins to slip. Imach, with you, is an interesting word, which we'll return to shortly. Your instruction as the onlooker, as the fellow Jew, you should uphold him. You should help him. And regardless, even if he's a stranger, even if he's a convert, and make sure he can live with you. The Torah goes on to talk about that you can't take interest if you give him a loan, and we'll get back to that pasuk in a moment. And then, just short 4 pasukim later, a third time. Ki amuch achicha imach. And you can see the Torah developing a pattern in urgency and desperation order. In the more unfortunate life situations, building upon the previous. The first was bad financial situation, has an asset, sell it, back on his feet. The second was, well, it's not as easy as that. And he's going to need some external aid and some assistance from others and can't just cash out of an asset. And the third is Ki amuch achicha, pasuk lametet 39, emach. Again, when your fellow man yamuch, the same word, begins to slip and fall, he falters financially, vinim kadlach. Now he's sold to you or someone else, and this is desperation. This is referring to when a person must be sold into or sells himself into slavery, Jewish slave, because he has debt that he can't pay back, because he stole and he couldn't, retrieve it, and the Beit Din sells him. But it could just be, in the more common cases, he can't pay back his debt, so he works it off and he sells himself. That is the most financially desperate situation that a person could possibly be in. He has nothing at all but himself. He's got his body. He has his labor. And that's what he's forced to do, to sell his body so that he can engage in his labor and literally work off his debt, the most desperate situation. And so you look at our ki amuch phrases. When your fellow man falters, there are 3, and certainly in a pattern of descending in order of more difficulty in terms of the financial situations in life. And we're going to focus on the middle one, because the truth is 1 and 3, the solutions are pretty clear. They're extreme situations, or at least in terms of tzedakah, one is extremely okay, you can say, where there's an asset there. You sell it, you get out of it, obviously. The third, what are you going to say? The person has 0 left. It's sad, it's unfortunate, it's desperate, but you got to do what you got to do in life. You have no choice. And the truth is, you could look similarly at the last and third source for the laws of tzedakah that we read in Perashat Behar, speaks there about an impoverished person, a person that needs help, he needs handouts, he needs loans, in an extreme situation. Extremes are always easier to think about, to handle, and to deal with. By the way, that's why we very often go to extremes, because the answers are easier when you go to an extreme, because things are clear. The way you react, the way you deal with an extreme situation. And that's why the way of the world sometimes is to gravitate to extremes, because it really absolves you of having to solve life situations, because things are clear on the fringes. But the middle situation is the one we need to analyze, because there things are not so clear. Your fellow man, he falters. And this time, he doesn't have an asset to sell. And we're going back to Pasuk Lamed Het. And it says again, Umata Yado, this time more than just Yamuch, Mata Yado, he's slipping, he is descending, he's faltering, he's hanging on for dear life, Emach, with you. The Torah's charge is Hehazak Tabo, uphold him. Then it talks about when you have to give him money, don't charge him interest. When you give him food, don't charge him interest. Fear your God. But let's just embrace that one Pasuk Lamed He, Pasuk 35. And let's look at the phraseology, because the term Hehazak Tabo, uphold him, is incredibly instructional and informative for us. And therefore, we're going to look at a midrash that Rashi is based on, and then one of the most important Rashis we will ever read. The midrash in Turat Kohanim says as follows, noticing that on the phrase of Kiyamuch, when your fellow man is in an unfortunate financial situation, we had two unique phrases added on. Mata Yado Emach, he begins to descend and falter with you. We have to get back to that word. And the instructions, which is Hehazak Tabo. You have to, you're, as the outsider, as the person, the onlooker, seeing the situation unfold, you're obligated to uphold him and to support him. Says the Midrash as follows in Turat Kohanim. Umata Yado, al tanihehu lered. What does that mean? Yamuch, fine, he's in an unfortunate situation. Mata Yado, he's faltering, he's descending, he's leaning over. Says the Midrash, al tanihehu lered. Don't let him fall. He's falling. Don't let him fall down. Okay. And the Midrash goes on to give an analogy, and it likens to someone that you see who has a hamor, he has a mule, and he has a load on it, and his load is beginning to fall. Run over and catch that load, because when it's still falling off, but hasn't yet fell down, one person can easily put it back on. It falls down to the ground, you need 5 people to lift it. Just the laws of gravity is what we're engaging. And you can translate that in modern times to someone unloading something from the back of their minivan. It's falling, run and catch it, because then you got a lot of leverage. One person, gravity's on your side, can uphold it and get that bag and that luggage and that person back on his feet in a moment. But if you allow it to fall all the way down, it takes a lot more assistance. And in comes the Rashi, sensitive to the Pasuk and what the Midrash is trying to do in the Pasuk. And let's pay attention to this Rashi in Pasuk Lamed He. Rashi says, Ve'hazakta, al taniyehu lered, sheyered, the same phrase as the Midrash. Don't let him fall, ve'yipol, as she adds on, all the way down. He's falling, he's faltering in life. You see something is going wrong, don't let him collapse. V'yeh kasher lahakimo. If that happens, raising him, putting him back on his feet will be far more difficult. Ella, says Rashi, as the Torah instructs, which was the implication of the Midrash, Hazekehu, you should uphold him when Misha'at Motat Hayad. From the moment Mata Yado, his hand begins to slip. From the moment you see him faltering. When is the time when that businessman needs intervention? Not at bankruptcy, not at bankruptcy. When you detect some type of unusual activity, when you see the debt is getting too high, when you see a customer being lost, when you see something closing down, that's when you get involved. Emach, the Torah gives us the ingredient. With you, says the Torah, meaning that you must be sensitive. You have to be empathetic. Listen, businessmen out there, you know what's going on in various businesses. Don't stand by as a spectator, watching the person collapse and then call him Bikur Hulim or somebody else. Don't wait to bankruptcy. Don't wait to the closing business sale, going out of business sale. Step in earlier. Says Rashi, when Misha'at Motat Hayad, when the slipping begins, when the faltering begins, and then says the Torah, then uphold him. Then make sure that he doesn't take the fall, that he stays on his feet. Intervention is early, intervention is hard, intervention is focused, but intervention is life-saving at that early stage. Mr. Community person who knows the cousins and the friends and everything going on, and here is the hearsay. And someone who is not just in business, faltering financially in some other venture. The time to intervene is not when you hear something drastic, is when you hear the first bit of information. What can I do about it? Says the Torah, 3 ingredients. Mata, you see the slippage. Emach, right away, have your antennas up and know how to detect and then feel the person's situation. Emach, live with him, be empathetic, and then take action. That's when you uphold him. And that motivates the Rambam to tell us something about this pasuk and about the law that comes out of this pasuk. And the Rambam first, and we're in the laws of Matalon Aniyim in the 10th chapter, opens in the first law by telling us something amazing. That Hayavina Anu Lizahed B'Mizvah Tzedakah, we are obligated to be careful with the law of tzedakah. Don't confuse that with maaser that we give. It's the unending charitable obligation that we have, despite, leave the percentages alone. It's a situational obligation. He says you have to be careful with that. Yoted mikol mizvot aseh, the Rambam, the author of the Sefer Mizvot, who listed 248 positive commandments. He says be more concerned and careful from any one of them, including believe in God. This is the one to be the most concerned about. Later on in this chapter, the Rambam famously lists 7 levels of tzedakah, of charity. And he says the one, ma'ala gedolah, she'en lemala mimena, the highest level of charity, zeh mahazik b'yad Yisrael shemach. This is to uphold and support the fellow Jew who is in an unfortunate situation and falling, whatever form that takes, a gift, a loan, whatever financial tools that are employed, or a partner, whatever it is, or you find them a job, to uphold and support him before he needs to ask, before he needs to beg, before he has collapsed, before he's in the situation where he has no choice and he's selling himself into slavery or doing something else desperate. Catch him on the way down. No better. Catch him when the slippage and the falling begins. Says the Rambam, the absolute highest level of tzedakah, because if you engage in this level, you don't have to worry about the other levels. You don't have to think about the impoverished. You don't have to get involved in the most desperate situations because you caught him, if you were able to, during the warning signals. That, says the Rambam, is the source, and the pasuk for that, says the Rambam, is our parasha. Shene'emar ve'hezakta bo. You shall uphold him. You shall support him. You shall detect. That red flag doesn't occur when the business closes the doors, when the foreclosure sign goes up. The red flag is when you detect the descent, when you find, when you hear about, when you see the difficulty begin. Emach, that's when the Jews' antennas are peaked. And that's when the compassion and the empathy begins. And that's when the intervention, the hazak dabo, is charged to every Jew. And therefore, even though we have 3 sources of tzedakah, Perashat, Mishpatim, Kesef Tavet Ami, of course, Parashat Re'eh, all the laws of Patoach Tiftach, the more obvious times of intervention, the light and the heavy, but the most important time of intervention, all the gray area and middle area in between, our parasha, when the person begins to fall, and the powerful ability to fulfill what the Rambam says is the most important mizvat aseh, to be the most concerned about, and to engage in the highest level of tzedakah, and that is ve'hazak dabo, catch him before he falls. Amen va'amen. Shabbat shalom.